Today we're talking about my favorite dev insight so far. In this dev insight, the revert of Freya's rework. We'll get into that in just a second and some other info that came along with it, but I have to quickly tell you about something else, being that I messed up yesterday and I'd like to apologize for that. Because yesterday I made a video about the nerfs that Yemoja received. And I was kind of misinformed about that. I based it on the Reddit thread, and the Reddit thread title was Yemoja's pre-release nerfs. However, it turns out these nerfs didn't happen pre-release. Unfortunately, this wasn't mentioned in the post, but these nerfs actually happened pre-PTS. So they were most likely found through data mining. In other words, we never actually saw the state of Yemoja before these changes, and the Yemoja version on PTS actually had these lower stats already. I absolutely didn't expect this, otherwise I would have checked with the patch notes that I recorded myself as well. But yeah, those changes were never really in place for us, though I could see maybe some of them being something that we see in the game in the future anyways, depending on how Yemoja performs. I pinned a comment in the video itself as well to clarify this as well. I'm going to leave the video up because I think it's still an interesting point of discussion how her balance in general is right now, and I go into that in the video too, but those changes in question here didn't actually affect us as the players. As such, sorry for misleading you in that regard. I should have double checked myself, made sure that these changes were actually put in place at the right time. And now for today's topic, where this can't happen because the info comes from Hi-Rez and I just made my own notes based on that. To summarize, the dev insight. I will also go through the blog post that comes along with this later today to specifically only address Freya again and discuss that in a bit more depth, but this is more to give you an overview of everything that was talked about, including Freya as well, in a bit more abridged version. First of all, there are some relatively major issues on the current client that are being addressed. The first one is the Pyromancer range bug, where you can leash the Pyromancer and it doesn't actually attack you. That will be fixed next patch. They found the issue now, unfortunately too late to include it in this patch. Merlin's bugs, where his abilities get completely locked and he can't use his ultimate or his blink, are still being worked on, and Hi-Rez still can't really reproduce that one apparently. So if you happen to have that bug, then contact Hi-Rez and send them your match ID where that bug happens so they have more to look into. And Tyr has a very high knockup at the moment, which is not intended, so he's going to get a hotfix nerf to lower the height of the knockup. The defense stance will still have a knockup though, just a little less high. This happened because his knockup height was reverted to the very original state when he first came out and not to a nerfed version of it later on. To be honest, I think it won't make a massive difference because a knockup is still a knockup and comes with all the implications. Of course, with the height being a little lower, the duration should also be a little bit shorter, and that is at least a little bit of help. And that brings us to the rework part of this patch. So first of all, Hi-Rez talked a little bit about past reworks or what they look at as reworks now. So 3 of those are Thor, Skadi and Nike. They all had overhauls to their abilities to some extent. You wouldn't necessarily always call that a rework depending on how you look at it, maybe more as a tweak, but Hi-Rez classifies these as reworks now, and this is how they want to look at reworks in the future as well. And those reworks had a very positive reception overall, with the exception of me talking about Thor, because I'm still not happy about that one. And then we have Freya. With Freya, the goals were not really met, and people are not really that happy about it, and Hi-Rez isn't that happy about it either. So what will happen is she will get reverted to her old state with her old abilities in November. That means her passive, her pulse and her irradiate will all be reverted. She will receive the balance numbers that she had in February 2017, so quite a while ago, and keep in mind that since then we've had a lot of item changes as well. Freya had a lot of problems. One of those was a very high skill and balance variance, meaning that depending on your skill, her performance would vary a lot, between basically just random casual modes and then high level ranked and then SPL, but also her balance had this high variation where she was either very strong or very weak and just constantly fluctuating. A major goal of the rework was to fix this, and unfortunately that did not happen, and in fact the rework actually made this worse than before. What will also come back along with the rework is her screaming when she uses her basic attack, so if you're missing that, you can be happy now. And there will be the exact mechanics as before, like for example the pulse stopping on hitting an enemy and her focus being more on being an AA god than this hybrid ability AA god, depending on how you were playing her. So everything goes back to 0. And along with that, Hi-Rez wanted to provide us with some indicators for when they're actually doing a rework, because there are various factors going into that. The first one is popularity. Either a god is very low in popularity or dropped a lot in popularity from their original state. In those cases, a rework becomes more likely because the other way around is just unlikely. High popularity characters generally don't get reworks because too many people enjoy them in their current state. And one example of that, even though it wasn't mentioned in the patch notes, would of course be Loki, who a lot of people want to rework for, but you can't really do that because too many people like him the way he is. Freya, in that regard, was niche popular. She was popular with a specific group of players, but not super popular. The next point is balance problems. High win rate variation would be one of them, or high difference between skill levels. As it, for example, is the case for Nike. When you look at her on tier list, she was usually very low before her rework, and her performance stats were very high. So things didn't really align and didn't really feel the same. It was hard to balance around that. What also comes into play are simply community discussions and requests about reworks. So, in other words, Hi-Rez said, we don't want to rework unless the community asks for it anymore. And that anymore is important because that used to not be the case, and in Freya's case, there actually weren't many requests for a rework. It's more a Hi-Rez decision than something that was asked for by the player base. Though I can see why they had that impression, and we'll get into why they did it a bit later. They discussed that in more depth. And last but not least, situations where the kit exhibits clear ways to improve the clarity, theming, or frustration issues. An example of that is Thor, who was really missing the thunder theme in his entire design despite being the god of lightning. Now, Hi-Rez at one point said that all of these factors are needed for a rework, but then at the same time they also said they're not needed. So just some of them are needed. I would say generally it seems like only some of them are needed based on the fact that, for example, Freya didn't get this community request, but maybe now all 4 of them are needed. Maybe that's what they wanted to express. There are also certain constraints that Hi-Rez puts on themselves for future reworks that are coming from now on. There are no more plans to fully rework an entire kit. Usually it will be around 2 abilities that are being worked on. That's because they just consider it not a good idea to rework a full kit, because instead they could just put that kit that they like on a new god and then balance the current god better so that people can keep the gameplay experience from the god that they really enjoy, and the other kit isn't wasted, so it just gets put in another character. They also don't want to remove any core unique features that are only present in that god. Like, for example, they mentioned the Thor spin, which is kind of not super unique because Chaac kind of has it too, but that's something that they wanted to keep and not completely remove from the character. The change also has to be specific in goals for gameplay and thematic improvements and focus the design towards those goals. That means, for example, for Skadi the goal was to make her ult feel more impactful, for Nike it was to fix the win rate and let you feel like you're playing towards the win instead of just being a passive win rate through your passive, and for Thor it was the theming and giving him a bit more complexity on the high end. So these are the things that now have to be fulfilled for a rework, and as we have quite a few reworks coming up in the near future, it's worth keeping them in mind so we know what we can expect. Next, Hi-Rez went into a section about the history of Freya. I'm just gonna give you a very short abridged version here. Again, we're going to do that in more detail in the post for Freya specifically. So in patch 5.11, her play count and win rate was at the very bottom, and they were already planning the rework. In 5.12, some changes came in with mage items, and she was actually in an okay place, but they decided to still pull through with the changes on the thought of there's only room to go up for her because she was so low performing. Well, they were wrong. There was still room to go down. You can still hit rock bottom after the rock bottom. And it turns out that maybe Freya's playstyle, maybe flow, was changed more than intended. The goal was to give her more consistent timeframes of damage instead of having this brief period of high AA burst, basically. It's not really burst, but you get the idea, just a few seconds of high damage. And also give her some better link here along with that, because it seemed that she was simply either too good or too bad, depending on if her abilities were up or not. it very much came down to the 2, essentially. If your 2 is down, then you're not much of a threat because you're suddenly a melee character, and that's not how you're designed to be played. So yeah, Hi-Rez wanted to get away from that, and they also wanted to fix her mana at the same time, but it kind of turned out that that was the opposite of what happened. So mana issues after the patch were still present. People that were good at the game knew how to manage their mana with Freya much better and just had too much mana all the time. And people that were not that good had no mana all the time because they wouldn't really utilize the AAs in a way where they could restore mana with them and get close enough to do that. So yeah, the issues just got worse. The popularity increased and the win rate simultaneously went down in unranked and up in ranked, and in the SPL she became a top pick and she got 9 nerfs throughout the next 6 months. But the core issues remained the same. There was always this problem where, especially in the SPL, she was almost always good, and even when she fell out of favor, they found a new way to play her effectively, whereas on other levels she was just dropping off more and more and more, and now she's the least popular, least performing god basically. So that led to the conclusion that the rework was not successful. Hi-Rez also thought that maybe Freya felt too different from before, and they decided that they would go with the option of going back. That again is something that will be much further discussed in the blog post. The goal here was to make her a niche popular god again, meaning her popularity should stay under spot 50, under the top 50%, and her skill cap should remain high, so win rate could also be under 50%, and that would be okay. So a niche god, not the main pick for most. Or in other words, she should be potent when used by a skilled player. We will see if that turns out to be the case, but Hi-Rez has mentioned that they are considering further changes to her, but not to her 1 and 2. Hypothetically speaking, this is not what's planned. Their goal is, they're hoping that Freya is okay in their state now, but hypothetically, the abilities that they think they should really be looking at, and I absolutely 100% agree with that, are Banish and the Ultimate, because now, after looking into the data more, they have the feeling that those are actually the abilities that are causing more problems than Pulse and Radiate, and I guess by having this shift of her 2 abilities, they kind of have more evidence of that than ever before, because now they've seen if we change the other 2 abilities, her issues remain the same. So Banish on one hand can screw your whole team if it goes wrong, and it doesn't really feel that core to her kit. If it was another form of CC, it would still be okay. It also is not really a fair and consistent CC compared to others, because it just happens instantly with no warning. And yeah, that's not how most CC is designed nowadays. You are usually meant to have some sort of counterplay outside of using your beats. The ult is similar for more skilled players. It's a very, very strong ultimate. It's relatively fast to go into the air and just be safe. You have a long immunity from pretty much anything, and it comes with high mobility because you can move pretty far away and chase pretty well. The ability might get, in the future again, possibly, more of a skill shot feel to it, where you have to do a little bit more while using it, and also have more impact, but in return also get more counterplay. The god that comes to mind here for me with this description is Chiron, who has an ult that kinda checks those aspects. Also, Hi-Rez wanted to note, it's important, there will be a Freya skin in the next patch. And in this case, they wanted to specifically point out that the Balance team didn't even know about the skin with the exception of Ajax. So this is not something that's correlated, and at the end of the day, it's a revert, so I don't necessarily think they would do that with a skin release anyways. So they wanted to emphasize that that's not connected, and I genuinely believe them in this context as well. That, by the way, is a hint for the Ruby skins. It's a very likely chance, with that being next month when the next patch comes out on Worlds, that Weiss will get the Freya skin then, or maybe even Blake, who knows, but probably Weiss. So that's interesting, that's cool, just on a side note here. But there will be more god reworks in the future. A lot of god reworks actually, if we look at them in detail. So 2 of them are confirmed and announced to happen at the start of Season 7. The goal is for these 2 to be at patch 7.1, so right at the start, but it's not 100% certain yet. Maybe they need a little bit longer for one of them. Maybe both are not ready at 7.1, but around that time they should be ready at least. And they will follow the constraints that were described above. And these are for Odin and Bastet. So for Odin, what Hi-Rez wants to keep is his highly aggressive warrior style with an ultimate that blocks player movement. You should be able to, in the future, fight better over a longer duration instead of just having one quick combo, because with Odin you literally just do a 2-1 and then you're 3 as soon as you land, and that's it, and either the enemy is dead or not. And they also want to have more flavor to his kit. The runic magic utilizes spear more, and I don't know, maybe they will even bring his horse in or something. They didn't mention that, but we'll see what exactly they're doing with Ravens. I would imagine that one ability that will get a rework here is the 3. I think the Bird Bomb combo, they can't really take that away completely because it's so core to his identity, and that's the signature move. So I'd be surprised if that gets touched overly much. Maybe the Bird Bomb part, the shield part, will remain up after exploding or something, I don't know. But I imagine especially the 3 will be targeted here and maybe completely reworked into a more AA focused ability or something like that. Something that gives them extended trade potential or something with multiple uses. And then I could also imagine the ult being changed somewhat, because it's always been such a restrictive thing about him that his ult is very, very impactful and just locks someone out of the fight entirely. So I could see that being adjusted to some degree. For Bastet, what should stay the same is that she will jump in and get her damage off, because that's how it works, and probably, I would imagine, jump out again as well. She will probably have better scaling into the late game than she does right now, and her cats are supposed to be more unique and more interesting. So what I could imagine is definitely something about the cats, of course, maybe something where the cats have more of their own mind, where they can maybe circle around an enemy and try to block them off. That would be interesting. Or maybe they can leap, or maybe the ability itself even goes beyond just the cats. And I could also imagine especially the 2 being looked at, maybe not completely reworked, but with how slow it currently is, with that wind up on the damage itself and the dot that comes afterwards, I could see something happening there. Or I could see the 3 being targeted in a different way too, because I don't think the 1 will be the one that will be drastically changed, just considering how core that feels to Bastet. That really is the most core part, along with her having cats. But then we have another rework that is at least being considered, and that is Ratatoskr. What is being considered is that he would get a partial rework to bring back multiple acorns. And if you're as scared as I am right now, don't be, because it's not that bad. So this is currently still in the works, it's currently still being designed, and this will not be in patch 7.1. This would be at a later date, and it's also not something that's set in stone yet. The goal would be to have multiple acorns that affect his kit in different ways, but not to the extent of the old days. And I think that's a good idea, because the old one was just impossible to balance with how much of an impact the certain acorns had in that time. So I can see why they would only do a minor version of that. Ratatoskr will also not get a complete rework. He would keep his core kit, and the focus of the changes would be specifically on the acorn. So I imagine that the acorn would again enhance different abilities, and that kind of would feel like a rework in itself, I guess, to some extent. So that would be cool as well. This is planned, if it happens, to be in early to mid Season 7, so it could still be quite a while away. And then they also talked about some gods that are not going to change. Nox, no plans to revert her, because Ajax said her classic features were indeed design mistakes, and old Nox ult is a bad ability and should not come back. Agree or disagree with that, but she's very popular at the moment, so she will not see a rework anyways. Arachne is also very popular, and her ult design will also not be coming back, because she is doing well in her current state, and Hi-Rez does not want to return to the gimmicky one-shot pull basically, and either it works out or you just sit back until you have your ult again. I think it's a bit unfortunate that Arachne will not receive any changes, because I think her kit is a little bit bland still, but I can see why they wouldn't go back to the old one. And speaking of old one, there's Ulduar. Nuwa is also considered in a good state, and what with her, Ajax said he thought the old kit was actually not that bad, but he wasn't even around when she was reworked. And what's being done with her is that elements of her old kit will be considered for future gods and are already in the game partially, as you can for example see with Ganesha's ult, who basically utilizes her old ultimate. And then last but not least, Halloween events start at the end of next month, and we have the winners for the Valentine's contest. On one hand is Necromancer Persephone by Juniper Garcia. That one makes me really happy. And on the other hand, that one makes me really happy too, but it surprises me. Enchanted Boyfriend Kukulin by Xalgod, because I did not expect that one to win based on how I thought that most people would not be interested in his Berserk form, and I thought he's not that popular. But I mean, meta shifted, but I'm surprised that people like the design that way, and I'm happy they did, because I like it when we have skins that are at least to some degree a little bit ugly. So yeah. That is all the info from this Dev Insiders. Ended up still being relatively long because there was a lot to talk about and a lot of cool things and a lot of things I'm actually really excited for. And then we will also look at the long post about Freya that Ajax made later today, so that will be the second video coming out. And if you want to see that and you're not subscribed yet, feel free to hit the sub button and maybe the bell, it helps me out. And other than that, see you for the next one later. Viewsloth, out.